Good wishes to all of you. Textbook in History for Class 12. Themes in Indian History, Part 1. Take a look at this. Defining the focus of study. What we will learn about this book. What defines the focus of this book? What does it seek to do? How it is? Is it linked to what has been studied in earlier classes? In class 6 to 8, we look at Indian history from early begins to modern times with a focus on one chronological period in each year. Then in the books for classes 9 and 10, the frame of reference changed. We looked at a shorter period of time, focusing specifically on a close study of the contemporary world. We moved beyond territorial boundaries, beyond the limits of nation states, to see how different people in different places have played their part in the making of the modern world. The history of India became connected to a wider interlinked history. Subsequently, in class 6, 11, we studied themes in world history. Expanding our chronological focus, looking at the vast span of years from the beginning of human life to the present, but selecting only a set of themes for serious exploration. This year we will study themes in Indian history. The book begins with Harappa and ends with the framing of the Indian Constitution. What it refers is not a general survey of 5 millennia, but a close study of select themes. The history book in earlier years have already acquainted you with Indian history. It is time we explore some themes in greater detail. In choosing the themes, we have tried to ensure that we learn about developments in different spheres: economic, culture, social, political, and religious, even as we attempt to break the boundaries between them. Some themes in the book will introduce you to do politics of the time and the nature of authority and power. Others explore the way societies are organized and the way they function and change. Still, others tell us about religious life and ritual practices, about the working of economies and the changes within rural and urban societies. Each of these themes will also allow you to have a closer look at the historian's craft. To portray the past, historians have to find sources that makes the past accessible. But sources do not just reveal the past. Historians have to grapple with sources, interrupt them, and make them speak. This is what makes history exciting. The same source can tell us new things if we ask new questions and engage with them in the new ways. So we need to see how historians read sources and how they discover new things in old sources. But historians do not only re examine old records, they discover new ones. Sometimes this could be chance discoveries. Archaeologists may unexpectedly come across seals and mounds that provide clues to the existence of a site of an ancient civilization. Romagin, through the dusty records of a district collectorate, a historian may trip over a bundle of records that contain legal cases of local disputes, and these may open up a new world of village life several centuries back. Yet are such discoveries only accidents? You may bump into a bundle of old records in an archive, open it up and see it without discovering the significance of the source. The source may mean nothing to you unless you have relevant questions in mind. You have to track the source, read the text, follow the clues, and make the interconnections before you can reconstruct the past. The physical discovery of a record does not simply open up the past. When Alexander Cunningham first saw a Harappan seal, he could make no sense of it. Only much later was the significance of the seals discovered. In fact, when historians begin to ask new questions, explore new themes, they have to often search for new types of sources if we wish to know about revoluntaries and rebels. Official sources can reveal only a partial picture, one that will be shaped by official censure and prejudice. We need to look for other sources, diaries of rebels, their personal letters, their writings, and pronouncements, and they are not always easy to come by. If we have to understand experiences of people who suffer the trauma of a partition, then oral sources might reveal more than written sources. As the vision of history broadens, historians being tracking new sources, searching for new clues to understand the past. And when that happens, the conception of what constitutes a source itself changes. There was a time when only written records were acknowledged as authentic, when what was written could be verified, cited, and cross checked. Oral evidence was never considered a valid source who was to guarantee its authenticity and verifiability. This mistrust of oral sources has not yet disappeared, but oral evidence has been innovationally used to uncover experience that no other record could reveal. Through the book Its Year, you will enter the world of historians, accompany them in their search for new clues, and see how they carry on their dialogues with the past. You will witness the way they tease out meaning out of records, read inscriptions, excavate archaeological sites, make sense of beats and bones, interrupt the epic, look at the stupas and buildings, examine paintings and photographs, interrupt police reports and revenue records, and listen to the voices of the past. Each theme will explore the peculiarities and possibilities of one particular type of source. It will discuss what a source called tell and what a source can tell and what it cannot. This is part 1 of themes in Indian history. Parts 2 and 3 will follow. Look at the contents, part 1, part 2, part 3. How to use this book? It is very important for civil aspirants or any other competitive examiners. This is part 1 of themes in Indian history. Parts 2 and 3 will follow. Each chapter is divided into numbered sections and subsections of facility learning. You will also find other material enclosed in boxes. These contain short meanings, additional information, more elaborate definitions. These are meant to assist and enrich the learning process but are not intended for evaluation. Each chapter ends with a set of timelines. This is to be treated as background information and not for evaluation. There are figures, maps, and sources numbered sequentially through each chapter. Figures include illustration of artifacts such as tools, pottery, seals, coins, ornaments, etc., as well as of inscriptions, sculpture, paintings, buildings, archaeological sites, plants and photographs of people and places, visual material that historians use as sources. Each chapter has maps. Sources. Sources are enclosed within separate boxes. These contain excerpts from a wide variety of texts and inscriptions. Both visuals and textual sources will help you acquire a feel for the clues that historians use. You will also see how historians analyze these clues. The final examination can include excerpts from an or illustration of identical similar material, providing you with an opportunity to handle these. There are two categories of in-test questions. A. Those within a yellow box which may be used for practice for evaluation. B. Those with the captions discussed which are not for evaluation. There are 4 types of assignments at the end of each chapter. These include short questions, short essays, map work, projects. These are meant to provide practice for the final assessment and evaluation. Hope you enjoy using this book. Yes, I am enjoying this book. Theme 1. Bricks, Beads and Bones, the Harappan Civilization. Take a look at figure 1, a Harappan seal. The Harappan seal figure is possibly the most distinctive artifact of the Harappan or Indus Valley civilization. Made of a stone called steatite, seals like this on often contain animal phonemes and signs from a script that remains undeciphered, yet we know a great deal about the lives of the people who lived in the region, from what they left behind their houses, pots, ornaments, tools, and seals. In other words, from archaeological evidence, let us see what we know about the Harappan civilization and how we know about it. We will explore how archaeological material is interpreted and how interpretations sometimes change. Of course, there are some aspects of the civilization that are as yet unknown and may even remain so. Times, places, times. Take a look at figure 1.2, beads, weights, blades. It's looking stunning actually. The Indus Valley civilization is also called the Harappan culture. Archaeologists use the term culture for a group of objects distinctive in style that are usually found together within a specific geographical area and period of time. In the case of the Harappan culture, these distinctive objects include seals, beads, weights, stone blades, figure 1.2, and even baked bricks. These objects were found from areas as far apart as Afghanistan, Jammu, Balochistan, Pakistan, and Gujarat. Map 1. Named after Harappa, the first site where this unique culture was discovered. Page 6. The civilization is dated between 2600 and 1900 BCE. There were earlier and later cultures, often called early Harappan and late Harappan. In the same area, the Harappan civilization is sometimes called the mature Harappan culture to distinguish it from these cultures. Take a look at map 1. Some important mature Harappan sites. You will find certain observations abbreviations related to dates in this book. BP stands for before present, BC stands for before common era, CE stands for common era. The present year is 2015 according to this dating system. C stands for the Latin word circa and means approximate. Early and mature Harappan cultures. Look at these figures for the number of settlements in Sindh and Cholistan, the desert area of Pakistan bordering the Thar Desert. Total number of sites: Sindh 106, Cholistan 239. Early Harappan sites 52, Cholistan 37. Mature Harappan sites: Sindh 65, Cholistan 136. Mature Harappan settlements on new sites: Sindh 43, Cholistan 132. Early Harappan sites abounded: Sindh 29, Cholistan 33. Beginnings. There were several archaeological cultures in the region prior to the mature Harappan. These cultures were associated with distinctive pottery, evidence of agriculture and pastoralism, and some craft settlements were generally small and there were virtually no large buildings. It appears that there was a break between the early Harappan and the Harappan civilization, evident for large scale burning at some times as well as the abandonment of certain settlements. Subsistence strategies. If you look at map 1 and 2, you will notice that a mature Harappan culture developed in some of the areas occupied by the early Harappan cultures. These cultures also shared certain common elements including subsistence strategies. The Harappans ate a wide range of plant and animals products including fish. Archaeologists have been able to reconstruct dietary practices from finds of charred grains and seeds. These are studied by archaeobotanists who are specialists in ancient plant remains. Grains found at Harappan site include wheat, barley, lentil, chickpea, and sesame. Millets are found from sites in Gujarat. Finds of rice and relatively rare. Animal bones found at Harappan sites include those of cattle, sheep, goat, buffalo, and pig. Studies done by archaeogeologists or zooarchaeologists indicate that these animals were domesticated. Bones of wild species such as boar, deer, and gharial are also found. We do not know whether the Harappans hunted these animals themselves or obtained meat from other hunting communities. Bones of fish and fall are also found. Agriculture technologies. While the prevalence of agriculture is indicated by finds of grain, it is more difficult to reconstruct actual agricultural practices where seeds broadcast scattered on plugged lands. Representations on seals and terracotta sculpture indicated that the bull was known, and archaeologists extrapolate from this that oxen were used for plugging. Moreover, terracotta models of the plug have been found at sites in Chalochistan and at Banwali, Haryana. Archaeologists have also found evidence of a plugged field at Kalibangan, Rajasthan. Associated with the early Harappan levels, see page 20, the field had two sets of furrows at right angles to each other, suggesting that two different crops were grown together. Archaeologists have also tried to identify the tools used for harvesting. Did the Harappans use stone blades set in wooden handles, or did they use metal tools? Most Harappan sites are located in semi arid lands where irrigation was probably required for agriculture. Traces of canals have been found at the Harappan site of Shortugal in Afghanistan but not in Punjab or Sindh. Discuss, are there any similarities or differences in the distribution of settlement shown on maps 1 and 2? Take a look at figure 1.3, a terracotta bull. Take a look at map 2, areas of early Harappan occupation. It is possible that ancient canals silted up long ago. It is also likely that water drawn from wells was used for irrigation. Besides, water reservoirs found in Dholvira, Gujarat may have been used to store water for agriculture. Take a look at figure 1.4, copper tools. Do you think these tools could have been used for harvesting? Take a look at figure 1.5, reservoir at Dholvira. Note the Majri work. Discuss, what is the evidence used by archaeologists to reconstruct dietary practices. Source 1. How artifacts are identified. Processing of food required grinding equipment as well as vessels for mixing, blending, and cooking. These were made of stone, metal, and terracotta. This is an excerpt from one of the earliest reports on excavations at Mohenjo-daro, the best known Harappan site. Saddle querns are found in considerable numbers, and they seem to have been the only means in use for grinding cereals. As a rule, they were roughly made of hard, gritty, igneous rock or sandstone, and mostly show signs of hard usage. As their bases are usually convex, they must have been set in the earth or in mud to prevent their rocking. Two main types have been found, those on which another smaller stone was pushed or rolled to and fro, and others with which a second stone was used, a pounder, eventually making a large cavity in the nether stone. Querns of the former type were probably used solely for grain, the second type possibly only for pounding herbs and spices for making curries. In fact, stones of this later type are dubbed curry stones by our workmen, and our cook asked for the loan of one from the museum for use in the kitchen. From Ernest Mackay. Further excavations at Mohenjo-daro, 1937. Take a look at figure 1.6, saddle quern. Archaeologists is use present day analogies to try and understand what ancient artifacts were used for. Mackay was comparing present day querns with what he found. Is this a useful strategy? Take a look at figure 1.7, layout of Mohenjo-daro. How is the lower town different from the citadel? Mohenjo-daro, a planned urban center, perhaps the most unique feature of the Harappan civilization was the development of urban centers. Let us look at one such center, Mohenjo-daro, more closely. Although Mohenjo-daro is the most well-known site, the first site to be discovered was Harappa. The settlement is divided into two sections, one smaller but higher and the either much larger but lower. Archaeologists designate these as the citadel and the lower town respectively. The citadel owes its height to the fact that buildings were constructed on mud bricks platforms. It was walled, which means that it was physically separated from the lower town. The lower town was also walled. Several buildings were built on platforms which served as foundations. It has been calculated that if one laborer moved roughly a cubic meter of earth daily, just to put the foundations in place, it would have required 4 million person days. In other words, mobilization labor on a very large scale. Consider something else. Once the platforms were in place, all buildings activity within the city was restricted to a fixed area on the platforms, so it seems that the settlement was first planned and then implemented accordingly. Other signs of planning include bricks which, whether sun dried or baked, were of a standardized ratio where the length and breadth were 4 times and twice the height respectively. Such bricks were used at all Harappan settlements. Take a look at figure 1.8, a drain in Mohenjo-daro. Notice the huge opening of the drain. The plight of Harappa. Although Harappa was the first site to be discovered, it was badly destroyed by brick robbers as early as 1875. Alexander Cunningham, the first Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India (ASI), often called the father of Indian archaeology, noted that the amount of brick taken from the ancient site was enough to lay bricks for labor 100 miles of the railway line between Lahore and Multan. Thus, many of the ancient structures at the site were damaged. In contrast, Mohenjo-daro was far better preserved. Citadels. While most Harappan settlements have a small height western part and a large lower eastern section, there are variations at sites such as Dholvira and Lothal, Gujarat. The entire settlement was fortified, and sections with a town were also separated by walls. The citadel within Lothal was not walled off but was built at a height. Laying out drains. One of the most distinctive features of Harappa sites was the carefully planned drainage system. If you look at the plan of the lower town, you will notice that roads and streets were laid out along an approximate grid pattern. Interesting, intersecting at right angles, it seems that streets with drains were laid out first and then new houses built along them. If domestic waste water had to follow into the straight drains, every house needed to have at least one wall along a street. The most ancient system ever discovered. About the drains, Mackey noted it's a certainly the most complete ancient system as yet discovered. Every house was connected to the straight drains. The main channels were made of bricks set in mortar and were covered with loose bricks that could be removed for cleaning. In some cases, limestone was used for the covers. House drains first emptied into a sump or septic septic into which solid matter settled while wastewater flowed out into the straight drains. Very long drainage channels were provided at intervals with sumps of cleaning. It is a wonder of archaeology that little heaps of material, mostly sand, have frequently been found lying alongside drainage channels, which shows that the debris was not always kept away when the drain was cleared. From Ernest Mack, Early Indus Civilization, 1948. Drainage systems were not unique to the larger cities but were found in smaller settlements as well. At Lothal, for example, while houses were built of mud bricks, drains were made of burnt bricks. Take a look at figure 1.9. This is an isometric drawing of a large house in Mohenjo-daro. There was a well in room number 6. Where is the courtyard? Where are the two staircases? What is the entrance to the house like? Domestic architecture. The lower town at Mohenjo-daro provides examples of residential buildings. Many were centered on a courtyard with rooms on all sides. The courtyard was probably the center of activities such as cooking and weaving, particularly during hot and dry weather. What is also interesting is an apparent concern of privacy. There are no windows in the walls along the ground level. Besides, the main entrance does not give a direct view of the interior or the courtyard. Every house had its own bathroom paved with bricks, with drains connected through the wall to the street drains. Some houses have remains of staircases to reach a second floor or the roof. Many houses had wells, often in a room that could be reached from the outside and perhaps used by passers-by. Scholars have estimated that the total number of wells in Mohenjo-daro was about 700. Take a look at figure 1.10, plan of the citadel. Discuss which of the architecture features of Mohenjo-daro indicate planning. Are there other structures on the citadel apart from the warehouse and the great bath? The citadel. It is on the citadel that we find evidence of structures that were probably used for special public purposes. This includes the warehouse, a massive structure of which the lower brick portions remain, while the upper portions probably of wood. Decade long ago, and the great bath. The Great Bath was a large rectangular tank in a courtyard surrounded by a corridor on all four sides. There were two flights of steps on the north and south leading into the tank, which was made watertight by setting bricks on edge and using a mortar of gypsum. There were rooms on three sides, in one of which was a large well. Water from the tank flowed into a huge drain across a lane to the north lay a smaller building with 8 bathrooms, 4 on each side of a corridor with drains from each bathroom connecting to a drain that ran along the corridor. The uniqueness of the structures as well as the context in which it was found, the citadel with several distinct buildings has led scholars to suggest that it was meant for some kind of a special ritual bath. Take a look at figure 1.11, a copper mirror. Take a look at figure 1.12, a fine spot. Tracking social differences. Burials. Archaeologists generally use certain strategies to find out whether there were social or economic differences amongst people living within a particular culture. These include studying burials. You are probably familiar with the massive pyramids of Egypt, some of which were contemporaneous with the Harappan civilization. Many of these pyramids were royal burials where enormous quantities of wealth was buried. At burials in Harappan sites, the dead were generally laid in pits. Sometimes there were differences in the way the burial pit was made. In some instances, the hollowed out spaces were lined with bricks. Could these variations be an indication of social differences? We are not sure. Some graves contain pottery and ornaments, perhaps indicating a belief that these could be used in the afterlife. Jewelry has been found in burials of both men and women. In fact, in the excavations at the cemetery in Harappa in the mid 1980s, an ornament consisting of three shell rings, a jasper, a kind of semi precious stone, bead, and hundreds of micro beads was found near the skull of a male. In some instances, the dead were buried with copper mirrors, but on the wall, it appears that the Harappan did not believe in burying precious things with the dead. Looking for luxuries. Another strategy to identify social differences is to study artifacts which archaeologists broadly classify as utilitarian, utilitarian and luxuries. The first category includes objects of daily use made fairly easily out of ordinary materials such as stone or clay. These include quants, pottery, needles, flesh rubbers, body scrubbers, etc., and are usually found distributed throughout settlements. Archaeologists assume objects were luxurious if they are rare or made from costly, non-local materials or with complicated technologies. Thus, little post of finance, a material made of ground sand or silica mixed with color and a gum and then fired were probably considered precious because they were difficult to make. The situation becomes more complicated when we find what seem to be articles of daily use, such as spindle wheels made of rare materials such as fence. Do we classify these as utilitarian or luxurious? If we study the distribution of such artifacts, we find that rare objects made of valuable materials are generally concentrated in large settlements like Mohenjo-daro and Harappa and are rarely found in the smaller settlements. For example, miniature pots of fans, perhaps used as perfume bottles, are found mostly in Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, and there are none from small settlements like Kalibangan. Gold too was rare, and as at present probably precious, all the gold jewelry found at Harappa sites was recovered from hoards. Take a look at figure 1.13, a tool and beads. Hoard are objects kept carefully by people, often inside containers such as pots. Such hoards can be of jewelry or metal objects saved for reuse by metal workers. If for some reason the original owners do not retrieve them, they remain where they are left till some archaeologist finds them. Discuss what are the models of disposal of the dead prevalent at present, to what extent do these represent social differences. Finding out about craft production. Locate Shanhudaro on map 1. This is a tiny settlement less than 7 hectares as compared to Mohenjo-daro 125 hectares, almost exclusively devoted to craft production, including bead making, shell cutting, metalworking, seal making, and weight making. The variety of materials used to make beads is remarkable. Stones like carnelian of a beautiful red color, jasper, crystal, quartz, and steatite metals like copper, bronze, and gold, and shell, fence, and terracotta or burnt clay. Some beads were made of two or more stones cemented together, some of stones with gold caps. The shapes were numerous: disc shaped, cylindrical, spherical, barrel shaped, segmented. Some were decorated by incising or painting, and some had designed etched onto them. Take a look at figure 1.14, pottery. Some of these can be seen in the National Museum, Delhi, or in the Site Museum at Lothal. Discuss: should the stone artifacts illustrated in the chapter be considered as utilitarian objects or as luxuries? Are there any that may fall into both categories? Techniques for making beads differ according to the material. Stitchat, a very soft stone, was easily worked. Some beads were molded out of a paste made with steatite powder. This permitted making a variety of shapes, unlike the geometric forms made out of harder stones. How the steatite microbead was made remains a puzzle for archaeologists studying ancient technology. Archaeologists' experiments have revealed that the red color of carnelian was obtained by firing the yellowish raw material and beads at various stages of production. Nodules were chipped into rough shapes and then finely flaked into the final form. Grinding, polishing, and drilling completed the process. Specialized drills have been found at Chanhodaro, Lothal, and more recently at Dholvira. If you locate Nageshwar and Bhalkot on map 1, you will notice that both settlements are near the coast. These were specialized centers for making shell objects, including bangles, ladies, and inlay, which were taken to other settlements. Similarly, it is likely that finished products such as beads from Chanhodaro and Lothal were taken to the large urban centers such as Mohenjo-daro and Harappa. Identifying centers of production. In order to identify centers of craft production, archaeologists usually look for the following raw materials such as stone noodles, wool shells, copper ore, tools, unfinished objects, rejected and waste material. In fact, waste is one of the best indicators of craft work. For instance, if shell or stone is cut to make objects, then pieces of these materials will be discarded as waste at the place of production. Take a look at figure 1.15, a terracotta figurine. Take a look at figure 1.16, copper and bronze vessels. Sometimes larger prices were used up to make smaller objects, but minuscule bits were usually left in the work area. These traces suggest that apart from small specialized centers, craft production was also undertaken in large cities such as Mohenjo-daro and Harappa. Strategies for procuring materials, as is obvious, a variety of materials was used for craft production. While some such as clay were locally available, many such as stone, timber, and metal had to be procured from outside the Ajuval plain. Terracotta toy models of bullock carts suggest that this was one important means of transporting goods and people across land roads. Riverine routes along the Indus and its tributaries, as well as coastal routes, were also probably used. Materials from the subcontinent and beyond. The Harappas procured materials for craft production in various ways. For instance, they established settlements such as Nageshwar and Balkot in areas where shell was available. Other such sites were Sotukhai in far of Afghanistan near the best source of lapis lazuli, a blue stone that was apparently very highly valued, and Lothal, which was near source of carnelian from Bharuch in Gujarat, steatite from South Rajasthan and North Gujarat, and metal from Rajasthan. Another strategy for procuring raw materials may have been to send expeditions to areas such as the Khetri region of Rajasthan for copper and South India for gold. These expeditions established communication with local communities. Occasional finds of Harappan artifacts such as steatite microbeads in these areas are indications of such contact. There is evidence in the Khetri area for what archaeologists call the Ganeshwar Jodhpur culture. With its distinct non-Harappan pottery and an unusual wealth of copper objects, it is possible that the inhabitants of this region supplied copper to the Harappans. Take a look at figure 1.17, a Harappan jar found in Oman. Take a look at map 3, the Harappan civilization and West Asia. Contact with the distant lands. Recent archaeological finds suggest that copper was also probably brought from Oman. On the southeastern tip of the Arabian Peninsula, chemical analysis have shown that both the Omani copper and Harappan artifacts have traces of nickel, suggesting a common origin. There are other traces of contact as well. A distinctive type of vessel, a large Harappan jar coated with a thick layer of black clay has been found at Omni sites. Such thick coating prevent the percolation of liquids. We do not know what was carried in these vessels, but it is possible that the Harappans exchanged the contents of contents of these vessels for Omani copper. Mesopotamia text datable to the 3rd millennium BCE refer to copper coming from a region called Magan, perhaps a name from Oman, and interestingly enough, copper found at Mesopotamia sites also contains traces of nickel. Other archaeological finds suggestive of long distance contacts include Harappan seals, weights, dice, and base. In this context, it worth nothing that Mesopotamia texts mention contact with regions named Dhilman, probably the island of Bahrain, Magan, and Meluha, possibly the Harappan region. They mention the products from Meluha, carnelian, lapis lazuli, copper, gold, and varieties of wood. A Mesopotamia might say of Meluha May your Bard be the Hazabad. May its call be heard in the royal palace. Some archaeologists think the Hazabad was the peacock. Did it get this name from its call? It is likely that communication with Oman, Bahrain or Mesopotamia was by sea. Mesopotamia texts refer to Milha as the land of seafarers. Besides, we find depictions of ships and boats on seals. Take a look at figure 1.18. This is a cylindrical seal typical of Mesopotamia, but the humped bull motif on it appears to be derived from the Indus region. Take a look at figure 1.19. The round Persian Gulf seal found in Bahrain sometimes carries Harappan motifs. Interestingly, local Dilmum weights followed the Harappan standard. Take a look at figure 1.20, seal depicting a boat. Discuss what were the possible routes from the Harappan region to Oman, Dilmun, and Mesopotamia. Take a look at figure 1.22, a sealing from Roper. Take a look at figure 1.21, letters on an ancient signboard. How many seals are impressed on this piece of clay? Discuss what are some of the present day's methods used for long distance exchange of goods. What are their advantages and problems? Sales scripts weights. Sales and ceilings. Sales and ceilings were used to facilitate long distance communication. Imagine a bag of goods being sent from one place to another. Its mouth was tied with a rope and on the knot was fixed some wet clay on which one or more seals were pressed, leaving an impression. If the bag reached with its seal intact, it means that it had not been tampered with. The sealing also conveyed the identity of the sender. An enigmatic script. Harappan seals usually have a line of writing, probably contains the name and title of the owner. Scholars have also suggested that the motif, generally an animal, conveyed a meaning to those who could not read. Most inscriptions are short, the longest containing about 26 lines. Although the script remains unidentified to date, it was evidently not alphabetical, where can sign stands for a vowel or a consonant, as it has just too many signs somewhere between 375 and 400. It is apparent that the script was written from right to left, as some seals have show a wider spacing on the right and cramping on the left, as if the engrave began working from the right and then ran out of space. Consider the variety of objects on which writing has been found. Seals, copper tools, rims of jars, copper and terracotta tablets, jewelry, bone rods, even an ancient zinc board. Remember, there may have been writing on perishable materials too. Could this mean that literacy was widespread? Weights exchanges were regulated by a precise system of weights, usually made of a stone called chet and generally cubic. Figure 1.2, which no markings. The lower denominations of a weight were binary 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, etc. up to 12,800, while the higher denominations followed the decimal system. The smaller weights were probably used for weighting jewelry and beads. Metal scale pans have also been found. Take a look at figure 1.23, a praised king. Discuss, could everybody in Harappan society have been equal? Ancient authority. There are indications of complex decisions being taken and implemented in Harappan society. Take for instance the extraordinary uniformity of Harappan artifacts as evident in pottery. Figure 1.14 says weights and bricks, notably bricks though obvious not produced in any single center. were of a uniform ratio throughout the region from Jammu to Gujarat. We have also seen that settlements were strategically set up in specific locations for various regions. Besides, labor was mobilized for making bricks and for the construction of massive walls and platforms. Who organized these activities? Palaces and kings. If we look for a center of power or for depictions of people in power, archaeological records provide no immediate answer. A large building found at Mohenjo-daro was labeled as a palace by archaeologists, but no spectacular finds were associated with it. A stone statue was labeled by labeled and continues to be known as the priest king. This is because archaeologists were familiar with the Mesopotamian history and its priest kings and have found parallels in the Indus region. But as we will see page 2 point, no, page 23, the ritual practices of the Harappan civilization are not well understood yet nor are there any means of knowing whether those who performed them also held political power. Some archaeologists are of the opinion that Harappan society had no rulers and that everybody enjoyed equal status. Other feels there was no single ruler but several. That Mohenjo-daro had a separate ruler, Harappa another, and so forth. Yet others argue that there was a single state. Given the similarity, the standardized ratio of brick size and the establishment of settlements near sources of raw material, as of now, the last theory seems the most plausible as it is unlikely that entire communities could have collectively made and implemented such a complex decisions. Take a look at map 4 areas of late Harappan occupation. The end of the civilization. The end of the civilization. There is evidence that by 1800 BCE, most of the mature Harappan sites in regions such as Cholistan had been abandoned. Simultaneously, there was an expansion of population into new settlements in Gujarat, Haryana, and western Uttar Pradesh. In the few Harappan sites that continued to be occupied after 1900 BCE, there appears to have been a transformation of material culture marked by the disappearance of the distinctive artifacts of the civilization, weights, seals, special beads, writing, long distance trade, and craft specialization also disappeared in general. In general, far fewer materials were used to make far fewer things. House construction techniques deteriorated and large public structures were no longer produced. Overall, artifacts and settlements indicate a rural way and settlements sorry a rural way of life in what are called late Harappan or successor cultures. What brought about these changes? Several explanations have been put forward. These range these range from climatic change, deforestation, excessive floods, the shifting and or drying up of rivers, to overuse of the landscape. Some of these cases may hold for certain settlements, but they do not explain the collapse of the entire civilization. It appears that a strong unifying element, perhaps the Harappan state, came to an end. This is evidenced by the disappearance of seals, the script, distinctive beads, and pottery. The shift from a standardized weight system to the use of local weights and the decline and abandonment of cities. The subcontinent would have to wait for over a millennium for new cities to develop in a completely different region. Take a look at map 4 areas of late Harappan occupation, Arabian Sea. Evidence of an invasion. Deadman Lane is a narrow lane varying from 3 to 6 feet in width. At the point where the lane turns westward, part of the skull and the bones of the thorax and upper arm of an adult were discovered, all in very friable condition at a depth of 4 to 2 inches. The body lay on its back diagonally across the lane 15 inches to the west were a few fragments of a tiny skull. It is to it is to these remains that the lane owes its names. From John Marshall, Mohenjo-daro and the Indus Civilization, 1931. 16 skeletons of people with the ornaments that they were wearing when they died were found from the same part of Mohenjo-daro in 1925. Much later in 1947, R.E.M. Wheeler, then Director General of the SE, tried to correlate his archaeological evidence with that of the Rig Veda, the earliest known text in the subcontinent. He wrote, the Rig Veda mentioned Pur, meaning rampart, fort, or a stronghold. Indra, the Aryan war god, is called Puramdhara, the fort destroyer. Where are or where these citadels it has in the past been supposed that they were mythical, the recent excavation of Harappa may be thought to have changed the picture. Here we have a highly evolved civilization of essential non Aryan type, now known to have employed massive fortifications. What destroyed this firmly settled civilization, climatic, economic, or political deterioration may have weakened it, but its ultimate extension is more likely to have been completed by deliberate and large-scale destruction. It may be no more chance that a late period of Mohenjo-daro men, women, and children appear to have been massacred there on circumstantial evidence. Indra stands accuser from R.E.M. Wheeler, Harappa, 1946, Ancient India, 1947. In the 1960s, the evidence of a massacre in Mohenjo-daro was questioned by an archaeologist named George Dills. He demonstrated that the skeletons found at the site did not belong to the same period, whereas a couple of them definitely seem to indicate a slaughter. The bulk of the bones were found in context suggestion burials of the sloppiest and most irreverent nature. There is no destruction level covering the latest period of the city. No sign of burying, extensive burning. No bodies of warriors clad in armor and surrounded by the weapons of war. The citadel, the only fortified part of the city, yielded no evidence of a final defense. From G.F. Dills, The Mythical Massacre at Mohenjo-daro, Expedition 1964. As you can see, a careful re examination of the data can sometimes lead to a reversal of earlier interpretations. Discuss what are the similarities and differences between map 1 and 2 and 4. Discovering the Harappan civilization. Take a look at figure 1.24. Tutankhamun's sketch of the first known seal from Harappa. So far we have examined facts of the Harappa civilization in the context of how archaeologists have used evidence from materials remains to piece together parts of a fascinating history. However, there is another story as well about how archaeologists discovered the civilization. When Harappa sites fell into ruin, people gradually forgot all about them. When men and women began living in the area millennia later, they did not know what to make of these strange artifacts that occasionally surfaced, washed by floods or exposed by soil erosion, or turned up while plugging a field or digging for treasure. Cunningham's confusion. When Cunningham, the first Director General of the ASI, began archaeological excavation in the mid 19th century, archaeologists preferred to use the written word, text, and inscriptions as a guide to investigation. In fact, Cunningham's main interest was in the archaeology of the early historical 6th century BC, 4th century CE, and later periods he used the accounts left by Chinese Buddhist pilgrims who had visited the subcontinent between the 4th and 7th centuries CE to locate early settlements. Cunningham also collected, documented, and translated inscriptions found during his surveys. When he excavated sites, he tended to recover artifacts that he thought had cultural value. A site like Harappa, which was not part of the itinerary of the Chinese pilgrims and was not known as an early historic city, did not fit very neatly within his framework of investigation. So, although Harappan artifacts were found fairly often during the 19th century and some of these reached Cunningham, he did not realize how old these were. A Harappan seal was given to Cunningham by an Englishman. He noted the object but unsuccessfully tried to place it within the time frame with which he was familiar. This was because he, like many others, thought that Indian history began with the first cities in the Ganga Valley. See chapter 2. Given his specific focus, it is not surprising that he missed the significance of Harappa. Take a look at figure 1.25. The stratigraphy of a small mound. Notice that the layers are not exactly horizontal. Sites, mounds, layers. Archaeological sites are formed through the production, use, and discarding of materials and structures. When people continue to live in the same place, their constant use and reuse of the landscape results in the buildup of occupational debris called a mound. Brief or permanent abandonment results in alteration of the landscape by wind or water activity and erosion. Occupations are detected by traces of ancient materials found in layers which differ from one another in color, texture, and the artifacts that are found in them. Abandoned or desertions, what are called sterile layers, can be identified by the absence of such traces. Generally, the lowest layers are the oldest and the highest are the most recent. The study of these layers is called stratigraphy. Artifacts found in layers can be assigned to specific culture periods and can thus provide the cultural sequence for a site. A new old civilization. Subsequently, seals were discovered at Harappan by archaeologists such as Dayaram Sahni in the early decades of the 12th century in layers that were definitely much older than early historic levels. It was then that their significance began to be realized. Another archaeologist, Rakal Das Banerjee, found similar seals at Mohenjo-daro, leading to the conjecture that these sites were part of a single archaeological culture. Based on these finds in 1924, John Marshall, Director General of the AC, announced the discovery of a new civilization in the Indus Valley to the world, as S.N. Roy noted in the Story of Indian Archaeology. Marshall left India 3000 years older than he had found her. This was because similar, till then unidentified seals were found at excavation at Mesopotamian sites. It was then that the world knew not only of a new civilization but also of the contemporary with Mesopotamia. In fact, John Marshall's stint as Director General of the Asia marked a major change in Indian archaeology. He found the he was the first professional archaeologist to work in India and brought his experience of working in Greece and Crete to the field. More importantly, though, like Kannagam, he too was interested in specular finds. He was equally keen to look for patterns of everyday life. Marshall tended to excavate along regular horizon- horizontal units measured uniformly throughout the mound, ignoring the stratigraphy of the site. This means that all the artifacts recovered from the same unit were grouped together, even uh, sorry, even if they were found at different stratigraphic layers. As a result, valuable information about the context of these finds was irretrievably lost. Wheeler at Harappa, early archaeologists were often driven by a sense of adventure. This is what Wheeler wrote about his experience at Harappa. It was, I recall, on a warm May night in 1944 that a 4 miles Tonga ride brought me as the newly appointed Director General of the Archaeological Survey with my local museum officer from a little railway station labeled Harappa along a deep sand track to a small rest house beside the moonlit mounds of the ancient site. Warned by my anxious colleague that we must start our inspection at 5:30 next morning and finish 7:30 after which it would be too hot. We turned in with the dark figure of the Punkhawala crouched patiently in the entrance, and the night air rent by innumerable jackals in the neighboring wilderness. Next morning, punctually at 5:30, our little procession started out towards the sandy heaps. Within 10 minutes, I stopped and rubbed my eyes as I gazed upon the tallest mound, scarcely trusting my vision. 6 hours later, my embarrassed staff and I were still toiling with picks and knives under the blazing sun. The mad Sahib, I am afraid, setting a relent, rent, relentless pace from R.E.M. Wheeler, my archaeological mission to India and Pakistan 1976. New techniques and questions. It was R.M. Wheeler after he took over as Director General of the ASI in 1944 who rectified this problem. Wheeler recognized that it was necessary to follow the stratigraphy of the mound rather than dig mechanically along uniform horizontal lines. Moreover, as an ex-army brigadier, he brought with him a military precision to the practice of archaeology. The frontiers of the Harappan civilization have little or no connection with present day national boundaries. However, with the partition of the subcontinent and the creation of Pakistan, the major sites are now in Pakistani territory. This has spurred Indian archaeologists to try and locate sites in India. An extensive survey in Kutch has revealed a number of Harappan settlements, and explorations in Punjab and Haryana have added to the list of Harappan cities sites. While Kalibangan, Lothal, Rakhighari, and most recently Dolvira have been discovered, explored, and excavated as part of these efforts. Fresh explorations continue. Over the decades, new issues have assumed importance, where some archaeologists are often keen to obtain a cultural sequence, others try to understand the logic underlying the location of specific sites. They also grapple with the wealth of artifacts trying to figure out the functions these may have served. Since the 1980s, there has also been growing international interest in Harappan archaeology. Specialists from the subcontinent and abroad have been jointly working at both Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. They are using modern scientific techniques including surface exploration to recover traces of clay, stone, metal, and plant and animal remains as well as to minutely analyze every scrap of available evidence. These explorations promise to yield interesting results in the future. Discuss which of the themes in this chapter you would have interested in Cunningham, which are the issues that have been of interest since 1947. Problems of piecing together the past. As we have seen, it is not the Harappan script that helps in understanding the ancient civilization. Rather, it is material evidence that allows archaeologists to better reconstruct Harappan life. This material could be pottery, tools, ornaments, household objects, etc. Organic materials such as cloth, leather, wood, and reeds generally decompose, especially in tropical regions. What survive are stone, burnt clay, or terracotta, metal, etc. It is also important to remember that only broken or useless objects would have been thrown away. Other things would probably have been recycled. Consequently, valuable artifacts that are found intact were either lost in the past or hoarded and never retrieved. In other words, such finds are accidental rather than typical. Classifying finds, recovering artifacts is just the beginning of the archaeological enterprise. Archaeologists then classify their finds. One simple principle of classification is in terms of material such as stone, clay, metal, bone, ivory, etc. The second and more complicated is in terms of functions. Archaeologists have to decide whether, for instance, an artifact is a tool or an ornament or both or something meant for ritual use. An understanding of the function of an artifact is often shaped by its resemblance with present day things, beads, coins, stone plates, and pots are obvious examples. Archaeologists also try to identify the function of an artifact by investigating the context in which it was found. Was it found in a house, in a shrine, in a grave, in a kiln? Sometimes archaeologists have to take resource to indirect evidence. For instance, though there are traces of cotton at some Harappan sites, to find out about clothing, we have to depend on indirect evidence, including depictions in sculpture. Archaeologists have to develop frames of reference. We have seen that the first Harappan seal that was found could not be understood till archaeologists had a context in which to place it, both in terms of the cultural sequence in which it was found and in terms of a comparison with finds in Mesopotamia. Take a look at figure 1.26. Was this a mother goddess? Take a look at figure 1.27. A proto Shiva seal. A linga is a polished stone that is worshipped as a symbol of Shiva. Problems of interpretation. The problems of archaeological interpretation are perhaps most evident in attempts to reconstruct religious practices. Early archaeologists thought that certain objects which seemed unusual or unfamiliar may have had a religious significance. These included terracotta figures of women, heavily jeweled, some with elaborate headdresses. These were regarded as mother goddesses. Rare stone statuary of men in an almost standardized posture, seated with one hand on the knee, such as the priest king, was also similarly classified. In other instances, structures have been assigned ritual significance. These include the great bath and fire altars found at Kalibangan and Lothal. Attempts have also been made to reconstruct religious beliefs and practices by examining seals. some of which seem to depict ritual scenes. Others with plants motifs are thought to indicate nature worship. Some animals, such as the one horned animal, often called the unicorn, depicted on seals, seem to be mythical. Composite creatures in some seals, a figure shown seated cross legged in a yogic posture, sometimes surrounded by animals, has been regarded as a depiction of Proto Shiva, that is an early form of one of the major deities of Hinduism. Besides, colonial stone objects have been classified as lingas. Many reconstructions of Harappan religion are made on the assumption that later traditions provide parallels with earlier ones. This is because archaeologists often move from the known to the unknown, that is, from the present to the past. While this is plausible in the case of stone quads and pots, it becomes more spectral when we extended it to religious symbols. Let us look, for instance, at the Proto Shiva seals, the earliest religious text, the Rig Veda, compiled c. 1500 to 1000 before Common Era, mentions a god named Rudra, which is a name used for Shiva in later Puranic traditions. In the first millennium CE, see also chapter 4. However, unlike Shiva, Rudra in the Rigveda is neither depicted as Pashupati, lord of animals in general and cattle in particular, nor as a yogi. In other words, this depiction does not match the description of Rudra in the Rigveda. Is this then possibly a shaman, as some scholars have suggested? Take a look at figure 1.28, gamesmen or lingas. Take a look at figure 1.29, a terracotta cart. Shamans are men and women who claim magical and healing powers as well as an ability to communicate with the other world. This is what Mekhe, one of the earliest excavators, had to say about these stones. Various small cones made of lapis lazuli, jasper, chalcedony, and other stones, most beautifully cut and finished, and less than 2 inches in height, are also thought to be lingas. On the other hand, it is just as possible that they were used in the board games. From Ernest Mackay, Early Indus Civilization, 1948. Discuss what are the aspects of Harappan economy that have been reconstructed from archaeological evidence. What has been achieved after so many decades of archaeological work? We have a fairly good idea of the Harappan economy. We have been able to tease out social differences, and we have some idea of how the civilization functioned. It is really not clear how much more we would know if the script were to be deciphered. If a bilingual inscriptions is found, questions about the languages spoken by the Harappans could perhaps be put to rest. Several reconstructions remain speculative at present. Was the Great Bath a ritual structure? How widespread was literacy? Why do Harappan cemeteries show little social differentiation? Also unanswered are questions on gender. Did women make pottery, or did they only paint pots as at present? What about other craftspersons? What were the terracotta female figurines used for? Very few scholars have investigated issues of gender in the context of the Harappan civilization, and this is a whole new area for future work. Timeline 1. Major periods in early Indian archaeology. 2 millions before present. Lower Paleolithic, 80,000 Middle Paleolithic, 35,000 Upper Paleolithic, 12,000 Mesolithic, 10,000 Neolithic, early agriculturists and pastoralists, 6,000 Chalcolithic, first use of copper, 2600 BC Harappan civilization, 1000 BC early iron megalithic burials, 600 BCE to 400 CE early historic. Note, all dates are approximate. Besides, there are wide variations in developments in different parts of the subcontinent. Dates indicated are for the earliest evidence of each place. Time to major developments in Harappan archaeology. 19th century. 1875 report of Alexander Cunningham on Harappan seal. 20th century 1921 MS Watts begins excavation at Harappa. 1925 excavation begin at Mohenjo-daro. 1946 R.E.M. Wheeler excavates at Harappa. 1955 S.R. Rao begins excavations at Lothal. 1960 Bibi Lal and B.K. Thapar begin excavating at Kalibangan. 1974 M.R. Mughal begins exploration in Bahawalpur. 1980 a team of German and Italian archaeologists begin surface exploration at Mohenjo-daro. 1986 American team begins excavation at Harappa. 1990 R.S. Bisht begins excavation at Dolvera. Take a look at figure 1.30, a Harappan burial. Answer in 100 to 150 words. Question number 1. List the items of food available to people in Harappan cities. Identify the groups who would have provided these. Question number 2. How do archaeologists trace socio-economic differences in Harappan society? What are the differences that they notice? Question number 3. Would you agree that the drainage system in Harappan cities indicates town planning? Give reasons for your answers. Question number 4. List the materials used to make beads in the Harappan civilization. Describe the process by which any one kind of bead was made. Question number 5. Look at figure 1.30 and describe what you see. How is the body placed? What are the objects placed near it? Are there any artifacts on the body? Do these indicate the sex of the skeleton? Question number 6. Write a short essay about 500 words on the following. Describe some of the distinct features of Mohenjo-daro. Question number 7. List the raw materials required for craft production in the Harappan civilization and discuss how these might have been obtained. Question number 8. Discuss how archaeologists reconstruct the past. Question number 9. Discuss the functions that may have been performed by rulers in Harappan city. Map work. Question number 10. On map 1, use a pencil to circle sites where evidence of agriculture has been recovered. Mark and against sites where there is evidence of craft production and are against sites where raw materials were found. Project anyone. Question 11. Find out if there are any museums in your town. Visit one of them and write a report on any 10 items, describing how old they are, where they were found, and why you think they are on display. Question number 12. Collect illustrations of 10 things made of stone, metal, and clay produced and used at present. Compare these with the pictures of the Harappan civilization in this chapter and discuss the similarities and differences that you found. If you would like to know more, read Raymond and Bridget Alchin, 1997, Origins of a Civilization, Viking, New Delhi. G.L. Poshel, 2003, The Indus Civilization, Vistar, New Delhi. Shreen Ratnagar, 2001, Understanding Harappa, Tulika, New Delhi. For more information, you could visit www.harappa.com. Thank you.